One of the best stories in college football in 2024 has been the rise of the Pittsburgh Panthers. Pitt had a huge season back in 2021 in which Kenny Pickett almost won the Heisman, and Pitt was so much fun to watch. After a couple of down years though, the Panthers are back in 2024 and are currently fighting for a college football playoff spot. With the expanded playoff, the Panthers' chances of getting in have become more and more likely, and in today's video, we're going to talk about how Pitt football bounced back from some hard times, built one of the best teams in the country this year, and what I think they will do in the future. But before we get started, if you're a big fan of college football, be sure to subscribe to the channel, leave a like if you want to support today's video, and let me know what player, team, topic, or situation I can cover next. Now let's get started and talk about the insane rise of Pitt football. So Pittsburgh used to be one of college football's most successful independent teams, with 4 unanimous national championship claims in 1916, 1918, 1937, and 1976, but by the year 2000, they just become another team in the Big East Conference. The Big East has been sponsoring football as a conference since 1991, and in 2000, schools like Miami, Virginia Tech, West Virginia, and Boston College were there. Pitt would go 7-5 twice in both 2000 and 2001, losing the Insight Bowl in 2000, but winning the Tangerine Bowl the next year before jumping to 9-4 in 2002. Rod Rutherford was the quarterback, and they had a great freshman that you probably know named Larry Fitzgerald at wide receiver. He would instantly become the best receiver in the Big East and one of the best in the country. After a 2003 season in which the Panthers went 8-5, Larry put up 1,600 receiving yards and 22 touchdowns and was given the Walter Camp Award as the nation's best overall player as a sophomore. But he had the Heisman Trophy stolen from him by Jason White, who won it based on his stats from last season. Larry was gone in 2004 though, and Pitt once again only won 8 games that season. But 8 games was all they needed to win the Big East Conference and get a bid to their first ever BCS Bowl, the Fiesta Bowl, where they lost 35-7 to Utah from the Mountain West. But head coach Walt Harris had struggled in recruiting and was starting to come at odds with the athletic department and chose to leave after the Fiesta Bowl. Pitt fell off a cliff by 2005 and missed a bowl entirely, going 5-6. They would do this under new head coach Dave Wannstedt, who was a former NFL coach and an alum of Pitt. At the time, the Big East kept changing around, as they'd lose Miami, Boston College, and Virginia Tech to the ACC in 2005, and also added Louisville, USF, and Cincinnati, and they slowly again became one of the better teams in the conference. After hovering above 500 in 2005, 6, and 7, the Panthers exploded to a 9-4 record in 2008, and then 10-3 in 2009. But while the football team succeeded, more instability in the Big East led to some teams questioning their future in the conference. Pitt would win their last Big East championship in 2010 after going 8-5, and then sunk back down to 6-7 in 2011 and 2012, and Coach Wannstedt left, and the coach Pitt wanted to hire, Mike Haywood, got arrested for domestic abuse. Todd Graham was the head coach for the 2011 regular season before he left for Arizona State, and Paul Chryst was the head coach for 2012, helping lead Pitt into their first season of the ACC in 2013. But Pitt struggled to get consistency in the ACC, going 7-6 in 2013, 6-7 in 14, 8-5 in both 2015 and 16, and then back down to 5-7 in 17, before jumping back to a 7-7 record with an ACC title game appearance in 2018. Finally, the wrap up of the decade, they went 8-5 in 2019 and 6-5 in 2020. They had just been another mid-ACC team since joining and hadn't really done much, to be honest. But that all changed in 2021, which was an interesting season for the Panthers and really the ACC as a whole. It would be their 7th year under head coach Pat Narduzzi, who hadn't really had that much success and only won 1 of 4 bowl games since taking over. But the 2021 Panthers also had one of the better quarterbacks in college football, Kenny Pickett, on their roster, as well as one of the better running backs in Israel Abanikanda and wide receiver Jordan Addison. They started out the season with a huge win over UMass before upsetting Tennessee in Week 2, 41-34 in Neyland Stadium. There was a ton of hype for the Panthers after this, and then they immediately threw it all in the garbage can, losing to Western Michigan at home 44-41. But they would regroup and then drop 77 points on New Hampshire before they would beat Georgia Tech 52-51 and Virginia Tech 28-7 before meeting up with preseason ACC favorite Clemson in Week 7. But Clemson was struggling that year and was only 4-2 going into that matchup, and DJ Uiagalelei had a terrible game, throwing for 128 yards and 2 picks, while Kenny Pickett threw for over 300 yards and 2 touchdowns to help Pitt win 27-17. They dropped their next game to Miami though, losing 38-35, and there were thoughts that they wouldn't do too well the rest of the year. but they were able to reset and knocked off 4 straight victories to end the season at 10-2 and a lock for the Coastal Division title over Miami, who had finished at 7-5. Their opponent would be another weird team, as it was Wake Forest. They are currently ranked 16th in the country and were led by Sam Hartman at quarterback, and Pitt would end up winning 45-21 for their first ever ACC championship title, and they ended up playing Michigan State in the Peach Bowl. One of the most glossed over moments was Kenny Pickett's fake slide, which later caused a rule change. The Spartans ended up being too good for Pitt though, and the Panthers would lose 31-21 in that game. Kenny Pickett had an insane year for the Panthers and was a huge part of their success, throwing for 4,319 yards and an ACC-leading 42 touchdowns to just 7 interceptions. His favorite target was Jordan Addison, who had 1,600 receiving yards and 17 touchdowns, and on the ground, Israel Abanikanda had 651 yards and 7 touchdowns, and Vincent Davis had 593 yards and 4 scores. Sadly, 22 and 23 would not be as good for Pitt, as going into 2022, they would have to reload. Kenny Pickett was drafted into the first round by the Steelers, and Coach Narduzzi would have to pick up a new starting quarterback to help lead the offense under a new offensive coordinator by the name of Frank Cignetti Jr. The guy they got was Kedon Slovis from USC, but they had also lost Jordan Addison to USC in the portal, so there was a give and take there. Pitt would finish that year at 9-4 and finish second in the Coastal behind North Carolina. They were inconsistent throughout the season, winning big games against schools like West Virginia and Syracuse, but losing to teams like Louisville, Miami, and North Carolina, which was the loss that kept them out of the ACC championship. They finished the season with a Sun Bowl victory over UCLA, but it still felt like they underachieved. Kedon Slovis turned out not to be the guy that Pitt needed, throwing for 2,400 yards, which is 10 touchdowns and 9 interceptions. Nick Patty came in to replace him and threw for a couple touchdowns, and Jared Wayne was the main receiver with over 1,000 yards and 5 touchdowns, but Abanikanda was the main force on offense, exploding for 1,400 yards and 20 touchdowns. They went into 2023 with a lot of expectation again, including another matchup with their old rival in West Virginia. But they arguably had their worst season since 1998. Kedon Slovis transferred out, leaving incoming transfer Phil Dracovic as the starter, along with Penn State transfer Christian Vare as the backup, and Israel Abanikanda abandoned them for the NFL. After beating Wofford in their first game, Pitt dropped 4 straight matchups, including 2 old Big East rivals to Cincinnati and West Virginia, as well as North Carolina and Virginia Tech. They briefly got back into the win column in Week 6 with a surprise victory over number 14 Louisville, before dropping 4 straight to Wake Forest, Notre Dame, Florida State, and Syracuse. They finished the regular season with a win over Boston College and a loss to Duke to finish at 3-9. Despite Dracovic starting the season, he was terrible. He threw for 800 yards with 6 touchdowns and 3 picks, and he would also eventually move to tight end. His backup Christian Vare took over from there and threw for 1,100 yards with 7 touchdowns and 8 interceptions, and Nate Yarnell also got an opportunity to get on the field, throwing for 600 yards and 4 scores. Their leading rusher, Rodney Hammond, only had 500 yards on the ground, and their backup, Sibo Flemster, had 300 yards and 2 touchdowns. Receiving-wise, the Panthers were led by Bob Means, who had over 700 yards and 6 touchdowns, and would eventually get drafted into the NFL. So, how did the Pitt Panthers all of a sudden go from terrible to really good this year? Well, now let's talk about 2024. So far this year, Pitt has been super successful, which is partially because of their new offensive coordinator, Cade Bell, who came over from Western Carolina. They instantly sprang into having the 6th best scoring offense in terms of points per game in the country, putting up 45 points per contest. Another factor is who is playing quarterback. With Christian Vare transferring to Georgia State, the Panthers are leaning on Eli Holstein, who transferred in from Alabama, to lead their offense. So far, he's looking incredible. He had beaten out Nate Yarnell for the starting job in the preseason, and so far Holstein has 1,500 yards, 15 touchdowns, and just 3 interceptions through 5 games of play. He's somewhat going under the radar in a conference that features Cam Ward and Kyle McCord, but the Panthers are currently winning games. They started the year off at home against Kent State, and the Golden Flashes are honestly one of the worst college football teams ever, and I made a video about them recently, so nobody was surprised when Pitt went in and won 55-14. They would end up following that game up by getting revenge on their old Big East rivals, Cincinnati. They won the River City rivalry 28-27 after a late 4th quarter comeback, and then also won the Backyard Brawl 38-34 against West Virginia at home. They also came back in that one. They would follow that up by putting up 73 points against Youngstown State before starting conference play with a win over North Carolina 34-24 on the road. They currently sit at 5-0 and are one of just 19 teams that have made it halfway through the season without a loss, and are one of the few unbeaten teams left in college football. But how good are the Pitt Panthers? Well, it looks like the best team they've played so far is West Virginia, who currently sits at 3-2 with losses to Pitt and Penn State. Cincinnati is also 3-2, but has played a weaker schedule. This weekend will be a huge test for them as they take Cal, who's been one of the better teams in the ACC this season, which is still weird to say. And then in a couple of weeks, they play Syracuse, who's also looking really good after a win over UNLV. After that, they play SMU, Virginia, Clemson, and then Louisville and Boston College, and any of those teams could win if they had a good day. So it'll be a really good test to see how Pitt will be at the end of the year. They'll have to give Eli Holstein a lot of help to get there, as so far he's been the main driver in the offense, even in the running game, where he has 265 yards and 3 rushing touchdowns. They'll need running back transfer Desmond Reed back, who transferred in from Western Carolina, and so far has 374 yards and a touchdown on the ground, and also over 300 yards and 4 touchdowns receiving. Receiver-wise, former Akron transfer Kanana Mumpfield has 400 yards and 3 scores, and the rest of the teams they play this year are difficult, but there's not a reason why Pitt should necessarily lose more than one of them, as I'd say they'd probably end up losing to Clemson. They can make a run at the 12-team college football playoff, and it's been quite the year for Pitt. So what does the future look like for Pitt? Honestly, I'm not sure. They do continuously punch above their weight each and every year, and they're one of the more underrated brands and teams in the sport, considering how successful they used to be as an independent back in the day. But their lack of an on-campus stadium, and the fact that they share a home with the Steelers, could definitely hurt them eventually. We all know how fragile the ACC is right now, and Pitt is constantly named as one of those schools that could jump to a different conference, with most of the smoke being around the Big 12 because of their rivals West Virginia and Cincinnati are there. But how about their football program right now? I'm still not quite sure about Coach Narduzzi, since he is definitely an interesting personality in the coaching world and has had some really bad games and seasons with this team, but always finds a way to bounce back. There's a good chance Pitt might be able to take over as one of the better teams in the conference continuously, especially if Clemson and Florida State eventually leave. Anyways though, it's been cool to see Pitt take off this year, but if you're a Pitt fan, what do you think? What has made this year's team so special? How do you think you'll finish the rest of the season? And what other program or team should I cover in my next video? Be sure to let me know down below, leave a like if you support today's video, subscribe if you're new, and check out all my other videos on the end screen. Hope to see you guys again soon, but until next time, peace.